Welcome to the Oxygen Advantage podcast with your host, Oxygen Advantage founder Patrick McKeown. With the Oxygen Advantage podcast, we aim to show how functional breathing is an essential part of a healthy and well-balanced lifestyle. Each episode, we meet experts in their field from around the world and talk about their lives, their experiences, and how they learned the importance of breathing. Join us and get inspired. Get the Oxygen Advantage.
I love giving these podcasts, and every now and again you'll come across a unique character and you'll have to stay and listen to this one, because can you imagine a person who works currently with breathing, but coming from quite a different background, and not a background that you would typically associate with it. But with that, he's able to bring to the table a unique experience, a life path. And I can be absolutely sure that whoever he is talking to, especially if those individuals are coming from similar backgrounds, that they will take on board what he is saying. John O'Hegarty is a fellow Irishman. He was born in Tala in South County Dublin, and he currently lives in Dundrum. And yeah, John, it's a privilege. And I know we did connect here. You were about a year ago out here in Galway, and you were doing the Oxygen Advantage training. I remember you actually you had a motorbike, but I didn't really know all that much about your past. Now, and your past is so intriguing. It's absolutely amazing. So can you just give me a little bit of, say, growing up in childhood in Tala and your experiences there? And I just want to kind of get a sense of what shaped you in your formative years, and what sort of kid were you? Were you somebody that goes with the flow? Were you a child that could have been easily led, or were you the leader? Just to get an insight into you, because what I'd like to do is to picture this and put this all together.
Okay. We were just talking there before we came on. Yes, I did grow up in Tala. Tala was almost a rural setting back then, and had a very, very normal childhood. Very happy childhood. My teenage years, I was a typical teenager at the time. We were just chatting before we went on air there, but what we were doing and stuff. Nothing remarkable. And I think one thing I always had was curiosity. I was always curious. Even as a young child, I was always pulling things apart and getting in trouble for breaking things, and I wanted to know how things worked. To figure out how things functioned, and I think that followed me into my late teens and my early 20s, as I went on to pursue studies in philosophy and academics and stuff. So,
and
yeah.
Did you follow the normal path, or did you take, like, I left school initially at 14, but then I went back. It was common enough. I know when we talk about it, people will say that didn't happen, but in the 80s, a lot of my friends went into trades. One is a butcher. Yes, some of them went into construction. They went into carpentry, and I had left with them. But my issue then was I would be looking at what the teacher was saying, but not paying attention to the teacher. And I would put that down to the issues that I had going on with mouth breathing and sleep and everything. Did you follow it all the way through? So you actually took the Leaving Cert and then you went on to university?
I did. Mind you, I was very young. I think I did the Leaving Cert first time round. I was 16.
Wow.
I do remember sitting in a careers guidance office, the careers guidance officer in the school, and looking behind him and seeing all these little pamphlets of architect, plumber, electrician, mechanic, all these different career paths that I was expected to choose from at the age of 16, and it's way too young. So I repeated my Leaving Cert and retook it again when I was 17. But even at that age, I don't think you're in any, you don't have the capacity to be making those kind of decisions.
Yeah. And did you go then from there to do philosophy? It was quite a different degree. It wouldn't have been...
It was. I didn't go directly in. I I knew I was interested in writing. I knew that. So I did journalism for a couple of years, and it was whilst I was doing journalism, one of the modules we were doing, we had to do kind of media ethics and stuff like that, and we had a module in philosophy. And I was very lucky. I met a woman called Noreen O'Carroll. I believe she was the first woman in Ireland to receive a PhD in philosophy. And she handed me a book one day by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viktor Frankl.
Did
Man's
Man's
Search
Search
for
for
Meaning.
Meaning. I read it many years ago.
And
Wonderful book,
yeah,
actually. To become a Jesuit? No.
so I took up the undergrad in philosophy. And again, it was, to be honest, Patrick, looking back, it was kind of a back door into where I wanted to go, because I didn't get the points I
Mm-hmm.
needed to go
Mm-hmm.
straight in and take up an undergrad in year one in UCD or Trinity. So this was my way of getting there. And it was a bit of a circuitous route, but, like I say, I knew I wanted to write, and I was interested in the human condition. If you want to call it, if you want to be so lofty about it. But I was interested in humans. I was interested in what made us tick, and that's what led me to the philosophy. And from there, um, I saw an advertisement in the college one day for the University of Louvain in Belgium, and I looked into that. And this university was one of the world's oldest philosophy institutes, and whoa, this blew me away. So I applied, and it was quite an application. I had to get references and write essays, and it took some months, but remarkably, I got it, and I headed over at the age of 21. I headed over to Belgium to get stuck into philosophy, and the University of Louvain would be famous in philosophy circles, be like, because it held the Husserl archives, and Edmund Husserl was a famous phenomenologist. And during the war, they took in his body of work and they hid it from the Nazis, basically. And if they hadn't done that, perhaps there's a lot of things that may not have taken place, not just in the world of philosophy, but psychology, sociology, just investigations into the nature of the mind. He really was a big player. So it was a really significant place to study. And I loved the experience. I loved it. So that's what led me there.
And was it just out of an interest in terms of, okay, you say that you were curious, you had a curious mind, but sometimes I
Mm.
often feel that people who are drawn to something like philosophy, which is incorporating
Yeah.
presence of the mind and stillness of the mind, that the first person that we want to try and fix is ourselves, that we have this
hmm
innate drive or interest in it because we realize that our mind isn't exactly in the right place, even though we may not have anxiety, but we feel that something is a bit off. Was that your quest, or was it just you just had an interest in it and you just found the subject itself fascinating, or was it for yourself?
It's a good question. I think it was a little bit of both. I was interested in all the big questions surrounding, as I say, the human condition, consciousness, memory, perception. All of these things did interest me. But I think on another level, I do think you're right. I think you pursue something like that perhaps because you recognize something within yourself that you're not sitting quite right in the world, and you want to know why. Thinking was my way of getting through things, and that's that famous quote of thinking is a good slave but a terrible master. It'll only get you so far. And you've spoken about this, and it resonated with me when I heard you speak about it down in Galway, about how you had an overactive mind at a young age. And I think a lot of young people do, certainly the ones I come across today, even in my own line of work, kids in their 20s can be very overactive in the head, a lot of over rumination. And it's now all these years later, we were talking about this briefly before we went online, or on air rather. It's now I can see looking back perhaps there was some other things going on that were feeding into it, the physiology behind it that I wasn't aware of, I hadn't a clue about back then. So yeah, I mean, I think had I had a knowledge of the breath, how it influenced my mind back then, maybe things would have approached things differently. But I ended up very stuck in my head, and whether that was fueled further by dysfunctional breathing, I don't know. I can't say that. I can certainly say later on, yes, it did feed into it.
So it's almost as if the conversation I'm going to have or having now is different to when I know a couple of points about your past. So I'm just wondering, how do you go from this almost perfect childhood into leaving cert, into philosophy, and going down this route and ending up over here? Can you kind of bridge that gap? And I'm absolutely intrigued about it. Now, Ireland itself, Sean, was a tough enough place economically when you were growing up and I'm growing up. We're only 1 year apart.
It was. It was.
It
Yeah.
was a country of no hope. Most people were emigrating. You know, I know the last 20 years we have a lot of inward migration, but in the 1970s and 1980s, I remember a teacher saying to us,
Yeah,
they were going away in droves because this was a total basket case. Our little country, economically deprived. And there was some degree of sense of hopelessness. So I think there was probably a pain that was there anyway, and that was in every one of our childhoods growing up, navigating that.
I'd agree. Yeah.
But if you don't mind filling in the gap and go only as far as you feel comfortable with, and the only reason that I want to kind of paint this backstory is because it will just give us a bit of an insight into where then you come out of it. And that's what I'm interested in.
Sure. Okay. Without kind of I don't go off on too much of a tangent, but I completed the degree, went on. Again, the pursuit of the mind was my thing. I went on to do a master's degree in psychoanalytic theory. And at that point in my life, I would have said, yeah, I'm going to end up in that space somewhere. In the, psychodynamics seemed to be where I was being led, and I was awaiting to go to Vincent's Hospital and study with Dr. Cormac Gallagher at the time. And I was a little too young. I was only, I think, maybe 24, 25. And the age requirement to get into that course was 26, which obviously makes sense. I mean, you don't want to be sitting with a psychoanalyst who's, in their early 20s. So, the training and everything, whatnot, would have taken a few years. But nonetheless, I had some years to pass. And I set up a business. I set up a business in the courier trade, which again, is probably all but dead now, and died pretty much overnight with the advent of the internet. But back then, everything was being sent by messenger. If I'm sure you remember that from you up here. You lived up in Dublin, and there was messengers flying everywhere. So I set up a little business, and it was very successful. And unfortunately, one day I had an accident, and it didn't turn out well, and the individual whom I had the accident with passed away. One thing led to another, and yeah, I went off track, should we say?
So were you were driving? Was it a bike or a car or what?
A push bike.
A push bike. So you hit somebody while you were cycling a push bike.
Yes, yeah.
And that person passed on.
That person passed on, and it turned out later. I only found this out after some time, and after post-mortem and everything else. He had a brain aneurysm. So he was a small bump was enough to set it off. However, at the time, I didn't know that, and I believed I'd caused someone, I'd taken someone's life. And at that age, it sat very heavy with me. I couldn't handle it, and I've just been talking about how I had an inclination to think about things, and that turned inward and turned very negative. I had access. I dabbled in drugs beforehand. College years, if you like, it was the 90s. We were going to
Oh, of
raves, all this
course.
kind of
Yeah,
stuff. I was
yeah,
around people also in that industry, and so
yeah.
one thing led to another.
Hmm.
So in a short space of time, I had a heroin addiction.
And
Yeah,
was
that
it?
just brought me off.
And do you feel okay that part of this was trying to escape the activity of the mind? In other words, you were looking for some degree of silence,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure it didn't start with heroin. You were probably smoking joints, and then you were taking acid, you were taking E, and then probably onto. And
Which
the 1990s in Ireland, sorry to cut across you, John, it was everywhere.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we were just talking about this. It really was. The rave scene was just building, or the house scene rather, and there was everyone was at it, everybody, and there's a difference between like experimenting and socializing and around narcotics, but when you start, then when that changes and it becomes a secretive thing, and it becomes, you're using intensely, and it becomes something you're perhaps punishing yourself. It's a very different thing. Metastasize, if that's the right word, I don't know, into something very different. So within a
And
few years, yeah, it changed.
so it became a daily thing. Would you have
Oh
considered
yeah,
yourself that this was an addiction? You were in the trolls of it. And
oh
what
yeah.
happened?
The addiction intensified to a point where I started using crack cocaine, and the money involved in that is huge. If you have severe addiction, you need to be
Mm,
spending thousands plus even 2,000 a day, which is huge money, huge money. And that led to eventually it led to criminality. That's where things really, really, really changed for me.
yeah. So in order then for you to fuel the addiction, you then started getting involved with theft. And can you
Yeah,
talk
well,
about that?
robbery, yeah,
Robbery,
robbery, yeah,
if you feel comfortable talking about that.
yeah. It was something that just came about one day. There wasn't very much pre-planning in it. I needed money. I needed a fix. And, I would have had a lot of knowledge of of banks and their mechanisms and their operations, if we should we say, from just being in them as a courier for many years. So it seemed like the obvious thing for me to do. There was very little thought process, and people often ask me about this, and oh, you must have been pre-planning and thinking all this. No, it was very much a case of how do I get money and how do I do it without incident, without hurting somebody and whatnot. And it's just the obvious solution to me. But that then I was getting deeper all the time, and fast track 8 months into kind of the latter part of, well, 2023, 24. I was deep in it. I was
Well,
really deep in it.
you just mentioned 2023, 24. So this is just up to a couple of years ago, is it?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm
No,
losing my this
that's all right.
20 years old. 2003, 2004. Sorry,
Okay, sorry.
Jesus,
Okay,
Patrick. Yeah, that would give you
unless
that
I
would
heard
give me
you.
shock.
So it wasn't just one
2003,
bank.
2003. So yeah. So no, it was many. It was many.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people listening aren't going to shed a tear about a bank being robbed, because especially in Ireland from 2008, it was them robbing us. But anyway,
Yeah,
don't we won't
absolutely,
we won't
absolutely,
even go there.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
you can almost say that it was an ethical justification. At least you weren't breaking into some unfortunate person's house and somebody who's
No,
working
no,
hard, that kind of way. Uh,
that wasn't it. That wasn't in me, and because it was, I suppose I was fooling myself to this extent that and I thought, well, I'm robbing from an institution.
mm,
They're not going. There's nobody going to lose really here, and I justified it in all sorts of ways. But that's what you do in order to get money. When you're that deep in addiction, you will justify anything. You justify every time you use. You justify your means in order to get the money to use. So it's all acceptable and palatable to you to a degree. To a degree, that's probably yours palatable. But you
yeah.
yeah.
And did you know that you were in the grip? Because in order for something to compel, given your background, to compel you to start robbing a bank, that thing has to have a grip over you that I can't get my head around.
Oh yeah,
And the people listening here are not going to get their head around. So
absolutely, and I understand that. It's been the thing I've had many years. I've been trying to explain to people and to put a context on it. I guess there's a thing in law. I came to find out later. They call it the suspension of the voluntary mind, and it's that point before a plea for insanity. Certainly in Irish law, anyway. I don't know if it exists in law elsewhere in the world. But there is a suspension there of rationality. It's gone. So and I've had people even comment, well, you had a background in psychology and psychoanalysis and all these. That didn't mean anything. That didn't mean anything. And that's that part, as I say, is not there. It's gone. So um, you have a one track mind. It's literally just to keep putting off the inevitable withdrawal effect and what comes with it, both mental and physical.
so it's almost that the fear of withdrawal is worse than the fear of getting caught. Or did you maybe have some inclination that you wanted to be caught because you felt that maybe if this thing kept on going, it could have been the end of you? Did that ever come into your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think there was an element of that to it. But there was certainly relief when I was caught. There was a palpable sense of relief because I thought, okay, this craziness has stopped because I knew it was going to end badly. That could have been so easily a bullet, you know. Um, and I was so with that. Yeah, it could have ended so many other ways, Patrick. So in many ways, the way it unfolded and going to prison was something that saved my life.
Can you let me know what your sentence was and where did you go?
My sentence ultimately after yeah, there was an appeal by the DPP rather, the 12-year sentence, 4 years
Wow.
suspended. So it was a long time.
That's a long sentence for Ireland because murder would not carry all that much more.
Back then, yeah, back in the late '80s, murder absolutely wasn't that much higher. So it was a big sentence, and you have to accept that and deal with it in your own way. So again, that pushed in a whole other phase of my life, where I had to scrub out any plans I had for anything in the future. That's it. This is your life now, or no life as it is as it may be. So and it was 12 years is a long time. It's a long time.
And do you think Viktor Frankl's book brought you solace then because you had resonated with an individual who was in a refugee camp under Nazi rule or Nazi tyranny, and now there's some similarities there? Would that have helped get you through it? How did you get through it? Because you're going from a stage of addiction, and I can imagine as well the Irish prison system. It's not the best at reform. It's almost as if people are just locked away. I don't know what's the rehabilitation there. Was it helpful? How did you get through it? Or when did you start? Was it then that you started getting interested more? Well, of course, you had a background anyway in philosophy. Just a little bit like that. I want to kind of see where you were at and then how you bridged it to trying to get through it.
Certainly, the first few years weren't easy. You're railing against the facts of what happened. You're struggling to survive in a very alien environment. But as time passed, I got stuck in, and my saving grace was the gym, was movement, was getting out of the head, as we've often spoke or you've spoken about, and just finding a purpose in every day, just taking every single day as a thing in itself. So you just find purpose for that one day. You get through that one day because if you think well, I'm going to be here for another how many thousand days in this 11-foot by 13-foot concrete block. People harm themselves and worse in that headspace. So you have to, and again, kind of going back into the Frankl thing, you have to bring meaning. You have to bring meaning into why you're getting through this day. And it could be the smallest of things. And for me, it was the mark of progression and development was I was going down to the gym, and I'd got clean, got to the gym. I was rebuilding myself, and later on, I came across a fantastic yoga teacher, and I started to do yoga in my cell, and I did breathing and that kind of stuff. I also took up a post grad in there, so I started studying in there. So that again gave me a mark of progression throughout time. That every day wasn't just folding into the next, and it was just this big. So yeah, to bring back to your question, that definitely Frankel's stuff would have been very the very forward of my head. It was you have to find meaning. You have to find meaning. I think he's a lot of famous quotes around that, and I think one of them. I'm just trying to remember it here. I think he said, "If man has a why to live, he can bear almost any how. So how am I living? How am I getting through this? But if you have a why, it'll sustain you. It'll get you through one day at a time."
So you need hope. But you carried into that situation a lot of knowledge and a type of individual or qualities that a lot of people who go into that situation don't carry in. And I'm only thinking that there's plenty of individuals to go into incarceration and it doesn't help. In actual fact, they could come out just as bad or worse, and nothing has done to change their situation. They will make mistakes again, and they will end up going back in again. So it was almost as if you rehabilitated yourself. The system didn't rehabilitate you, but not everybody is going to meet that. So, John, this is an amazing experience now that you're bringing to the table. Can you tell me the people who you work with and what sort of individuals? Of course, everything is anonymous, but like, what sort of backgrounds are they coming? What age groups are you working with? What do they bring to the table? What's the mindset of these individuals? Are they open to change? And how do you communicate it? I know there's a lot of questions in there. I just feel that people will listen to you more so than me or other people because you're able to bring that experience to the table. I want to kind of get an idea of that.
Well, for the last 3-4 years, since training as a breathwork facilitator and then training with yourself, I've only really kind of got stuck into to the work in the last 6 months or a year properly. So I have started work. In fact, tomorrow I'll be working with a group who are in active recovery, and I have made efforts to to go back into the system to do work. And there are things are slowly now emerging for me, but it's taken time. So for the moment, it's mostly general population. But I'm finding more and more that work is naturally drawn to. Yes, the performance side of things absolutely is always there. I will always coach. I think I will always coach, old school coaching, if you want to call it that. But I find myself more and more drawn to mental health and how breathing can impact our mental health. So whilst I'm not working with any individuals specifically from that space at the moment on a one-to-one basis, I am doing group work, and hopefully that'll develop into something further.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. I think there's going to be an amazing fit there. And this is all part of the awareness. And so for people, so you teach one-to-one, because I'm just thinking as well, if there are people listening, and which there will be, and they have a person who can meet or that is struggling, and to reach out? Do you teach by Zoom? Do you teach face-to-face? Do you teach groups? Do you teach every way?
I do a bit of everything, yeah. So my preference is one-to-one, face-to-face. Zoom is great, but I think to have that connect with people, I think, especially in that area, I think it's very important to have physical presence. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end, or people can find links to my
Yeah,
my
totally. And
services, and
we'll put your
I'll be
details
on the OA. Yeah,
on the
yeah,
OA
great.
website, Oxygen Advantage, and we put your details at the end. What do you feel when you look back? Do you have regrets over the past? Have you come to accept it? Are you appreciative of the past? Where are you at with that?
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to be here. I've talking about my bio there too. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit because I did have something else happen to me that really changed things for me, and that was in 2019. I was involved in a motorcycle accident. So up to that point, I'd been getting myself together. I'd been coaching for a while, and whilst I still held on to a lot of dysfunctional breathing patterns from years of bad life decisions. The accident in 2019 ended up with a lot of physical trauma, particularly to around my diaphragm. And the impact on a motorcycle of hitting a car didn't do me any good. So I probably shouldn't have survived that. And it's only now in the last 3, 4 years that I can really look back and kind of go, okay, well, I'm just grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for what I've learned, um, both through breath work. Merck, who I think who you're aware of. I've trained with for a number of years, and training with yourself as well. All of that has brought a great sense of presence and clarity and peace of mind, which is, we were talking about this earlier. It's given me perspective. It's given me distance. And out of that has come a great sense of gratitude. I'm just happy to be here. I really am. And that might sound a little cheesy, but that's the feeling I have.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sense of pay it forward.
So when you talk about presence of mind, what do you mean in terms of, is it having a quietness of the mind that you can relate to everything around you, or how do you interpret it, and what do you do to maintain that?
I suppose it's the complete opposite to where I was at. You want to go back 20 years. The craziness, the absolute craziness, and the insanity of where I was at that point. Your mind is just, it's not yours. Whereas now I can have not just gone through the whole process of trying to reclaim my mind and reclaim my body. And now, in the last number of years, just being able to slow everything down, to be able to put space between thoughts, be able to look at things objectively. And I think I remember a number of years back coming across a quote by a yogi. I'm going to probably pronounce his name all wrong. Amrit Desai, I think was his name. And he said, the breath is the mind made visible. And that really stuck with me. And at that point, I'd been doing a little bit of breath work, and I'd been discovering how the breath can be used as a tool. You can put depending on what breathwork technique you're using, it can elicit all sorts of different state changes. But it was only when I came across functional breathing and how to breathe correctly every day that sense of calm comes. And it's something I was only thinking about before talking to you today. And that is, when you get to a point with the functional breathing, you realize how dysfunctional your breathing actually was, and how overly active your mind was, and how much energy was going into that, and just wasted. So it's a process. to answer that question, it's definitely a process, and my work reflects that process. I believe it's a lifelong process. I don't think you'll ever become a master of your breath fully. I think it's something I feel for myself, anyway, personally, that you always have to work on. But the further I get into it and I apply the techniques, I find the more space is there. And so, yes, there are some things. I mean, ultimately, I'm still in recovery. There are things I have as non-negotiables, and some of those are, simple things like doing my breathing in the morning, being aware of my breath throughout the day, noticing how that affects my mind and how they loop into to one another, and my mind can affect my breath. And the more awareness I bring to that, the more control I have. So they are my go-tos. I've also, in the last number of years, been working with temperature. So heat and cold has been major positive tools in my toolkit, if you like, and things that I teach. I think the cold, particularly, um, is something that if my mind gets super busy and I need to bring myself out of that immediately, extreme cold, get into the ice, get into the sea, get into a cold shower, whatever is available to you, get into it, because it'll elicit a state change. It'll bring a presence back, what I call actually a radical presence. You cannot deepen the cold. You don't have time to be ruminating about your problems or the past or the future or the anxieties. You are there and you are dealing with that stressor, and that's where the work, if you like, really comes in for me. And it's stuff I'm working with other people in the addiction space and mental health space, and it's so powerful. It's so powerful because, like I say, when you're in the cold, you have at least some degree of absence of rumination, or you have a bit of relief. You have a respite from the craziness of the head, and that can be enough to allow people to move forward just a bit. And there's also the kind of cross stress adaptation thing, where that if you learn how to deal with that stressor, and again using the breath to do it, you can bring that into other areas of your life. And for people with mental health or anxiety, addiction, grief, there's a whole list there that if they can use that, it's such a powerful tool. It really is.
It's almost as if you're training the brain not to embrace discomfort, going into the cold itself.
Absolutely.
And so the people then, when you're working with people who are coming out, say, of addiction, how do you communicate it with, because oftentimes, maybe it's different now, breathing now is kind of a hot topic. But I know in the past when I would be working with, say, individuals, I had to be very careful with the language that I was using, the way I was communicating it, because oftentimes they felt, well, breathing wasn't for them. Breathing is something that you do in a yoga mat in a lotus position. How do you communicate it to these individuals? Because these characters, these people, I don't want to say, that's not an derogatory term, but they may just feel that breathing isn't just for them, that breathing is for somebody else, or that approach. And the other thing is, if you're coming from a degree or a high state of anxiety, even paying attention to the breath itself may not be a nice thing to do. So there's a couple of questions in there. Yeah,
for sure. So sometimes with some people in a very heightened state, stress or anxiety, going straight into the breath work or breathing or talking to them about breathing, there's a resistance there that can be hard to get past. And very often I find that's where movement can really help. I firmly believe the body, breath, and movement are all intimately connected, and the mind are all intimately connected. And sometimes you just have to find the right key to get in there, and it's usually the breath. But if people are, as I say, in that really heightened state, be it because of addiction or mental health, or sometimes younger people as well, getting in and getting them just moving. That can be shaking, that can be all sorts of just different things. They get, just to release and kind of soften enough to allow them to access the breath. But I think if you can get somebody just to breathe in a certain way and change their breath without necessarily becoming aware of it first, but just to change the breath, for them to feel what that does. You don't have to sell it anymore. It sells itself. They will get, if you want, relief. I don't know what word you want to use, but the effect will be felt. I think it's just more about finding the way into doing that, rather than trying to sell this package to them of, if you breathe a certain way and if you can change your everyday breathing, that just, for some people, just will go, it won't work. It won't work. So you have to find the way in. And that's why I say the cold sometimes can be such a great master at that, because it's immediate. It's immediate. And how do you deal with the cold? Somebody gets straight into the cold, and straight away there's something clicks. There's something very deep in our physiology, very deep, something very deep, primally in us, that recognizes that. And I think whatever else is going on up here, um, as I say, it just does something.
Do you think everybody that has become addicted to a substance, that all they are looking to do is seek silence? I know I mentioned that earlier on. What's your take on that? Is it just, it's the human mind? We have been trying to get to the bottom of it for thousands of years. You can argue that most religions are founded on it, to bring a stillness to the mind. And yet the essence of achieving that got lost, because it got lost in, say, for example, in many religions, even though saying a prayer, for example, it was a time that you were out of your head because you were saying a prayer, you were repeating a mantra which changed your breathing. But the essence of bringing that stillness to the mind, it got lost. And something that's so simple and something that everybody needs, and especially those individuals or people who had a tendency towards addiction, even though it may not be people who are on hard drugs, but we're talking about, you could be addicted to gaming, you could be addicted to social media,
Yeah,
you
I
could
was
be
just
addicted
going
to
to say
porn, you could
social
be addicted
media.
to
Yeah, sure.
anything. And it's almost that, how come as a society, with your philosophical head, how come the most simple of a message here has been lost? Because I didn't hear it in my school. I don't know if you heard it in your school.
No.
You did hear it in philosophy, but it's been overlooked. Being able to quieten the mind. We're trained how to think, but we're not trained how to differentiate between productive thinking and unproductive thinking. We're not trained how to bring a stillness to the mind. I wonder why.
Yes, it's a very good, very, very good question. To go back, I suppose, into the roots of it, perhaps you mentioned kind of Eastern philosophy there, and the Western mind. I'm drawn to think of what's called the Cartesian split, which would be named after the French philosopher René Descartes, who literally brought that split about, the mind-body split that didn't exist up until then. And he was trying to that was an answer for him to try and figure out what was real and whether, all these other things. But nonetheless, it created what's called a dualism. And we had the mind and we had the body. And whilst, you have to forgive me, I'm a bit rusty on my history of philosophy here, but, whilst it did undoubtedly lead to some great things in terms of the development of psychology as we know it today and whatnot, it led to us having that split. And, 400 years later, we're sitting here having this conversation about why we have this split, why we have these overactive heads, this great instrument we have, but yet we end up kind of cutting ourselves with it, if you like, rather than using it as a tool. And over rumination, and yes, I came across an addiction in the depths of addiction. You do what you can to still the mind, and it's worth noting as well that drugs work to a point. They do still the mind. That's why people use them. So they work up until a point to where they don't work. So we are looking for stillness. Move forward to today. Having come from where I've come from, I see the same patterns and the same behaviors emerging all around me. You mentioned social media there. It's a classic one. I think it frightens me. It really frightens me, Patrick. Now how far we go to, how far away we've gone from a quietness of mind. Our minds are just so busy now. Our attention span has become so limited. The scroll, all that, we just, it's insane. I sometimes wonder, where's it going to end? At what point is it going to not end well? And yes, I think everybody strives, whether they know it or not. Or not, maybe not strives, but that everybody needs quietness of mind, or the ability at least to be able to quieten the mind, I should probably say. And that's something we've lost. Something we've lost, and it's we need to get it back. And it's been great. I mean, the wellness industry has, we've seen breathwork explode. We've seen all these different protocols kind of being pushed to us, and all these kind of silver bullet things on social media. Do this and do that and do the and I take some of them with a large pinch of salt. I think there's no silver bullet there, and I think also we've lost ourselves a bit as well in that. Um, we've become so used to social media now. Certainly in the wellness space, we talk about things like trauma and resilience and all these things, and these words are almost losing their meaning. I think they call it concept stretching. It's just we've kind of, where are we going with that? And it's almost it's an industry now, the wellness industry, and I think every individual has to find their own. There's nothing out there on Instagram that's going to give you that immediate bang. Yeah, okay, peace. I've got. It's not going to happen. You have to find that the old-fashioned way. Just as you were talking there earlier on, I was again just thinking of a quote by Ido Portal, the movement man.
I don't
Are
know.
you familiar with it? Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Ido Portal. I think he said something like, when struggle ends, emptiness begins. It was just probably quite a descriptive way of just saying we need something to lean into. We need something to lean into. And again, that kind of circles back to the ice baths and stuff like this, that if we have something to lean into, whether it's in the moment or whether it's on a daily basis or however that looks, we seem to, as humans, be able to rise to these challenges. We seem to gain meaning from things like that. Or sankalpa, as they I think they say in yoga, we're able to ascribe meaning. When we don't have that, emptiness comes in. Or in philosophy, they used to say, and ennui, the French philosophers, this kind of desperation, this anxiety over the meaningless of things. So we have to be able to put meaning into things. And very often that is through resistance. Certainly that's what I've discovered anyway, for myself. It's when we have that resistance and we can find a way to overcome those little resistances, or those little struggles rather, that we're able to suddenly, neuroscience has gone a long way to explain a lot of that in recent years. We're getting dopamine, we're getting all these serotonin, we're getting all these different things coming up because we've overcome things. So I think that there's an important message in there.
When you talk about resistance, John, is it resistance in terms of, say, for example, doing a strong breath hold, or resistance in terms of doing an ice bath, or is it resistance in that life throws you a challenge, or both? But sometimes it might be easier to start off with the thing that you feel that you have a little bit of control over, such as breathing exercises, such as cold water immersion.
Absolutely. I'm sure you're familiar with Andrew Huberman.
Yes.
Yeah, and he talks about top-down control, self-directed challenges, self-directed imposed struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be the ice bath, it could be a breath hold, but they're ones you do have. That's the important word here, is that you do have
Yes.
control.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I think it's vital that we do have those in our lives. We become so comfortable in so many ways. It's our own worst enemy, comfort. Although as humans we seek
Mm.
comfort, and that's understandable. I think it's like the mind; it's turned against us.
Yeah. 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 Good point. Looking forward, where do you feel your life, or what's on the horizon? Where do you want to bring it? Do you plan, or do you kind of go with the flow a little bit? In terms of how do you, in terms of, if you were to set a goal, would you set a goal to the point that it would cause you to be stressed out, or that balance? What do you do there?
No,
Do you,
I think I've learned to let go of a lot of those kind of things. Like I said to you, I'm very grateful for every day. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily help you make long-term plans, but I feel very committed to the work I'm doing right now. I feel for the first time that there's kind of a coming together of what I did years ago. In other words, from my studies years ago and what I've been studying for the last number of years, that they're coming together for me, and I'm getting great meaning out of that, and getting great purpose out of that. So I just like to see that develop. And as I said, there's a big part of that is paying it forward. What I mean by that is just bringing that to other people, and those that perhaps need it more than others in some cases. So yeah, just continuing with what I'm doing. And
great.
you know the work that I've done through yourself, and that like I said to you earlier, that's an ongoing progress. That's a study, and an
Mm-hmm.
active study.
Sure.
That just gets deeper and deeper. And I think the more you get into that, the more you realize how out of balance other things are. So it's there'll never be a moment where I go, yeah, no, I'm happy now. I've mastered everything.
Sure.
But the
Sure.
pursuit, the pursuit, the
Yeah.
pursuit,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
journey,
And
the
it's the
journey
journey, and it's the process as well. And it's quite an
is
enjoyable
the
one
process.
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I think it's a tremendous capability, all the stuff that you talked about, and that we have. Yes, we have the mind, but as you said, it could be either your friend or it can be your foe. And really about having
Yeah.
gentle mastery over the mind and stepping outside of
Absolutely.
thought, bringing attention onto the breath, into the body, into the moment. And that's how we connect with life. And so many of us go through the entire life, we're stuck in our heads the entire 80 years,
Yeah.
and we haven't even
And we've
seen what's
missed it.
around us. We've missed it.
We've missed it. Yeah. Yeah. How sad is that? How sad is that?
Oh, it's bizarre. It's just strange, that it happens, and it happens, and you can see people that they are so lost in thought. And of course, the thoughts and the thinking that's coming up, oftentimes it's going to be negative, it's self-critical, it's that
Yeah.
broken record
Absolutely.
that's going around in circles, It's really
Our brains are
amazing.
constantly looking for the negatives, and again, like I was saying, neuroscience has explained so much to us, and I think it can be very helpful to when people know that it's just your brain trying to protect you. Your brain is literally just looking for these negatives. So, especially when it comes to trauma and stuff, it remembers. Your brain will always remember with great detail events that happened around a traumatic incident, and it then seeks out anything, any possibility where that can reoccur, even on another level that we just, again, our brains are just constantly looking for things that can go wrong just to protect us. So it's not necessarily, and this is something I try to convey to people who do have those thoughts or who do have busy heads like that. There's nothing wrong with you innately. It's just your brain doing what it does. So being able to recognize that, and again, talking about that kind of distance piece we were talking about earlier on, but being able to step outside and go, oh, okay, so that's what's going on. Okay. And then that stops the self-criticism and the guilt and the shame and all these other emotions that could become attached. And again, it's just cascading kind of effect. So if we can kind of pull back from it, and again, that's where the breath is so important.
So if I hear you rightly, it's almost as if a person is reliving an event in their mind. And of course, that's going to fuel the emotions. But then they realize that they're reliving the event. And then they start giving out to themselves about reliving the event. And what am I doing? And I'm doing this all the time. And why am I dragging myself down? So what you're saying is that once that person has a realization that their brain is reliving that event because the brain is trying to protect them and to minimize them being exposed to a similar event. And that understanding that the brain is trying to protect you almost gives you a sense of relief that you're actually okay. It's normal.
Exactly. There's nothing abnormal. There's nothing wrong with you per se. You're just, your brain's just doing what it does. You know, it's there to protect you. It's doing its job. And likewise, I even look back at my own experiences. Ultimately, you know, addiction as well. You're setting out to protect. You're setting out to, you know, but it just becomes very distorted and unhealthy. But you know, it's ultimately your brain still trying to protect whatever it may be trying to protect itself from. You know, so yeah, just having an awareness of that, I think, is the key there, and is the starting block from where work can be done and progress can be made.
It's almost that we need to go a little bit softer on ourselves and not to be so, in some ways, not to go towards comfort too much, to go a little bit harder on ourselves, but in other ways that we're already too hard on ourselves to go a little bit softer on ourselves.
Absolutely, and it's all about balance, isn't it, Patrick? And you know, that's the amazing thing. You know, if we only understood that a little more often, we need to be easier on ourselves. Mind you, again, to go back to what we were talking about, we're living in a mimetic kind of society where we're constantly looking at others, and social media fuels that. That, you know, there needs to be, oh, I should be this, I should be that, I should be able to do this. And how many times do you open social media and it's telling you things that you have to do in order to be a complete person, or to be the right person, or to be whatever it may be, a healthy person, or to live longer? These things you have to do. So we have this constant thing of comparing and needing to be fulfilled by this next thing. But at the same time, I think as you said, if we lapse too much into the comfort zone, that can be a bad thing as well. So again, it's balance. It's like the autonomic nervous system, isn't it? All about balance, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Spend too long.
Yeah. And I can resonate as well with what you're talking about. Like when you're in your 50s, you have a certain amount of resilience. You have a few miles on the clock. I don't look at social media. I don't have Instagram or TikTok or Facebook on my phone.
Yeah.
I look at YouTube videos, the long form, typically podcasts and things like that I listen to. At the moment, I'm trying to learn a bit of Spanish, which is not going particularly well. But I feel for a 17-year-old, you know, because they're looking at social media and
brain's still developing.
Yeah.
Brain's still developing. They've been under 10 years of brain development. They've been
programmed.
Programmed into becoming addicts, you know. It's frightening. It's frightening.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it was really getting your backstory and everything. It's brilliant, you know. All of what shapes a human being and how life can kind of direct us in different paths and everything else. For people to, because I think it's very easy to communicate with you, and you will bring to the table an understanding of people who may be going through similar situations, or they feel that they can identify with your story. If they're to reach out to you, how would they do it? How will they find you?
Well, they can hopefully now go through yourself through the Oxygen Advantage portal. But pneumatic movement is the business I have. So I can be found on pneumaticmovement.ie. My new website's just been constructed, so I do have a card page there at the moment where they can contact me. Our pneumatic movements on Instagram. And Instagram is something I I begrudgingly went back on to 3 months ago
Sure.
after a hiatus of maybe 4 years, but it's a necessary evil, if you want to call it
Yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
has, don't get me wrong, social media has so many great things about it, but anyway, to answer that, yeah, just pneumatic movements on Instagram or pneumatic movements by
Yeah. Social
yourself.
media, it's a communication tool. It's brilliant at. As a comparison tool, it's not so good. And to differentiate.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, John O'Hegarty, it was a pleasure. And just to repeat, if people have difficulty trying to find them, go in on our website as well, oxygenadvantage.com, and look for instructors in Dublin. You'll come across John, or just put in John O'Hegarty, Oxygen Advantage, and you will be able to pull up his details there. So, enjoy the rest of your day and what your future, how it unfolds. And I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting one. Life fulfilled, a lot of purpose there as well. So all good.
We'll be keeping in touch, I'm sure.
Great. We'll do. Definitely. John, it's a pleasure. Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, for sure. Pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure talking to Patrick. And again, thank you for having me on. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Oxygen Advantage podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and maybe take the time to leave us a review. The Oxygen Advantage podcast is available from all your podcast providers.